Welcome to the Fatigue Files, a podcast that explores fatigue conditions from as many angles as possible while pushing the boundaries of thinking about fatigue as a signal to the 21st century and beyond. Cutting-edge thinking, practical strategies, thought-provoking explorations. They're going to all be here, and I'm your host, Anna Greer, welcoming you to this edition of the Fatigue Files. So everybody, welcome to another edition of the Fatigue Files podcast. And with me today, I have Frances Goodall, and we're going to have a really interesting conversation, I suspect, because Frances and I have in common that our fatigue was in our lives during the period when we underwent a Kundalini disturbance, or what some people call Kundalini awakening process. And Frances and I are really intrigued about the links between chronic fatigue and Kundalini activities. So, Frances, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
I think a good place to start, Frances, might be with your story.
Sure. Yeah, well, I believe it kind of began when I was 18 and I went to Nepal, and a friend brought a book on Buddhism and a book on meditation with her. And we both got really into these books, and then we both started to practice some meditation. We went to some yoga classes in Kathmandu, and I think I just got captivated by something then, and it became like key part of my life after that to sort of focus on meditation and spirituality and Buddhism at the time as well. And then a year later, I was at university at Nottingham. And so that I had a whole year out. I had a gap year after school, and then I went to university. And a few months into university, I suddenly started to get fatigue. And I was just on the bus to go and do some voluntary work. I was somebody who was doing all the things. I joined all the different societies, including the Buddhist Society, but also like surfing and all the things. And was studying psychology and philosophy. And then, I suddenly got fatigue. And I just, not just fatigue. I just suddenly felt like my whole system, something had gone wrong. I wouldn't even have put it in those words back then. It didn't feel like I was coming down with the flu, but it felt kind of like I was coming down with the flu, and I didn't understand what was happening. Yeah, so that's when the fatigue started. I didn't initially relate it in any way to Kundalini. That was kind of later on down the line. Because after that, I ended up having to come home from university. I was unwell. I eventually got a diagnosis of chronic fatigue, or ME, and yet, but even back then, like the meditation, the fact that I started this meditation felt like that was going to be a key for me to get my health back as well. So I continued with the meditation. I did at that point as well. I didn't have loads of hope about getting better initially or very quickly because I didn't really know what to do, and I also spent a lot of time watching daytime television, doing things that weren't going to help me get better. But in that journey, I started to, actually the Buddhist center moved around the corner from my house. So I was really pleased about that. So I could just get out to the Buddhist center and do a bit of meditation. And for 2 years, I had a sort of consistent level of fatigue that sort of was semi-housebound, could just about make it out to the Buddhist center, occasionally went out and did something else, but generally felt really unwell and brain foggy and fatigued and not able to do very much. And then 2 years into that, I was at the Buddhist center doing some meditation, and I suddenly felt this energy moving up my spine, and I felt amazing after that. I felt high, actually, and I thought I'd cured chronic fatigue. I thought it was gone. Meditation's cured me. Had 3 weeks where I barely slept, had loads of energy. It was like, then I was also like, oh my gosh, am I having now a psychosis, or am I having am I bipolar? Am I having a manic episode? And I had 3 weeks like that, and then I crashed, and I was even worse than I'd ever been before for a few weeks. So just been quite a long journey. I mean, I think it was even 4 years into the chronic fatigue recovery journey that I even started to understand that there was a Kundalini related element to it. And looking back, it all started to sort of then make sense. That's some of my story.
So when you say looking back, it started to make sense. What started to make sense about the fatigue and the Kundalini coming together as you looked back from that vantage point?
as I looked back, I started to see that even when I was at university and in Nepal, that I got quite deeply into things quite quickly, and was even starting to have, I would say, some kind of awakening kind of experience. It's quite not like really intense or anything like that. And my life was in sort of in some ways in quite a lot of chaos. I think there was a lot, well, I definitely know looking back now, there was also a lot of trauma in my system. I wasn't even that good at looking after my health in terms of my diet and that sort of thing. So there was a lot of imbalance there, but there was also something that was captivating me in terms of meditation and in terms of spirituality quite quickly. And I think something was already starting to happen, Kundalini related. I remember sometimes coming home from the meditations and feeling quite high when I was, doing these Buddhist meditations at the time. Tibetan Buddhist tradition, yeah, they came and taught for a group of us at the university. I remember. At the same time, though, when I was by myself, I would struggle to even sit for 5 minutes because I think there was so much kind of sort of anxiety or stress in my system that it was really hard for me to sit still and to meditate unless I was in a group, and then it somehow was much, much easier. Um, so I think something had started to wake up then, and I believe that because there was a lot of stress and trauma, and I also wasn't amazing at looking at after my health in my teenage years. I got into sort of lots of drinking and even some drugs and all that sort of stuff. And I was healthy in some ways, and I was intelligent. I did well at school. But I was kind of this mix of so many different things, I think, and it was just too much for my system. And I do believe that the kind of energy started to sort of wake up things that needed to be looked at in me, and in a way like I was taken under with illness because there was so much I needed to heal and so much I needed to learn from, and I wasn't ready to have an awakening, or my body mind system just wasn't ready for that. So the illness was kind of taking me out of my life and making me do a deep soulful journey to be more ready to have a more awake consciousness in a way. I mean, I'm not saying I'm awakened because I think it's a lifelong journey, but yeah, that's kind of how I see it. And does that make sense? Some sense.
It does make sense. It makes sense, in the sense of, I mean, what would be good is probably to step back and say what Kundalini is, because probably some people listening to the podcast might not even be aware that such a thing exists or understand what the term means. So it'd be good to kind of get your understanding of what Kundalini is. But it makes sense to me because it seems to me that your nervous system hadn't got the capacity for what was starting to stir. And what was starting to stir was pushing some of these traumas as well into awareness. And that can be quite overwhelming, can't it? It can be quite a difficult experience. Having been through that myself, it's quite hard. So let's take a step back, Francis, and just first of all, kind of look at what Kundalini is, and then get that understanding and add it to your story, which is really a really fascinating story. Just bring it in so that anyone who thinks, what the heck are they talking about, can kind of understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, from my understanding, I mean, I haven't done loads of reading around Kundalini recently. I did do when I started to realize that was what was happening. And also the more kind of Kundalini syndrome element of it. But Kundalini energy, from my understanding, is energy that's stored at the base of the spine. It's in all of us, and it has the potential to awaken through our bodies. And that could be a very harmonious, kind of quite easeful awakening, potentially perhaps more likely if it happens later in life, perhaps more likely to be easy, more likely to be easy if we've prepared the body mind system with lots of yoga and meditation and therapy and all the different, good diet, all the things that can support that process. So and it's an energy that can move up through all our different energy centers and bring healing and bring balance ultimately. And yet, if I believe if someone has got a lot of trauma, perhaps isn't, optimally, looking after their health in other ways, then it can be too much too soon, or it can be quite, it can dysregulate somebody temporarily, dysregulate more on the process of more regulation. So that's some of my understanding of it. And I think I did actually even read about Kundalini energy when I was 18. And I also read that people, if they activate Kundalini too young, or not too young, but it could also lead to some mental health issues as well. And that I think this book was suggesting that some people in mental hospitals, whatever, or having mental health difficulties are having a Kundalini awakening. And I remember getting really curious about that, and even asking my dad about that at 18. He was a social worker, and I mean, he was quite skeptical of that. He was a mental health social worker, and I was saying, do you think it's possible that some of your mental health patients are having a Kundalini awakening? And so even back then, I think I was very curious about this energy and what it was. But yeah, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of your understanding of what Kundalini energy is, or what it's about?
Yeah, I think that's a really good description of it. I think Gopi Krishna describes it as a kind of evolutionary energy that exists in every human system, and as you say, sleeps at the base of the spine. Some people feminize Kundalini as a goddess.
Yes, I was going to say that as well. Layla Martin, who I've done some training with in coaching and sexuality, she talks about it as like the goddess, and it's something to almost be worshipped within us.
Yeah, that's right. And some people see it in the form of a snake. It takes the mythic symbolic kind of shape of a snake that uncoils.
Yes.
And as you say, Kundalini is always active in the human system, and there can be very, very quiet processes of Kundalini, and there can be massive Kundalini eruptions and disturbances. I was listening to Maharishi Kalpriti, who's an Indian mystic in the Advaita Vedanta tradition, who says Kundalini is always awake in everyone, and that what we call an awakening is actually a disturbance of Kundalini, which I think is a really interesting take on it, and it's certainly something I would want to look at more. But for me, it certainly felt, as you describe it, you describe the energy coming up the spine. That's exactly what happened for me. I was in a desperate state. I think I was already very ill, actually. And I remember being in a very desperate situation, and every single day, basically going to meditate and trying to just get through the day. It felt like I was hanging on to reality with my fingertips at points. And there was this moment when I was cross-legged in meditation. Everything around me went completely dark, and this door opened and light came through the door, and a voice said, "Come through." So I must have gone through, and I was surrounded by light, which wasn't unusual in the sense that at the time I was a practicing spirit-filled Christian, so I was used to mystical phenomena, light, things like this, but it was very, very 3D, very, very intense. But what was different was there was this sudden explosion of energy from the base of my spine all the way up through my spine, out of the top of my head. I orgasmed, but it was so much more than an orgasm. It was just a complete explosion through every layer of consciousness, through every energetic layer of my being, of this energy. And I remember being so shocked that my eyes flew open, because I was like, what the hell? And I did not know what it was. Kundalini had never entered my universe. I didn't understand it. No one had ever spoken about it. I was a card-carrying, born-again, spirit-filled Christian coming from a very different kind of take on all things spiritual. So that was really amazing. And then the Bible that I had on my lap, which was closed, spontaneously fell open on the Song of Songs, which is a very mystical, erotic text. It's the ultimate kind of mystical text for Judeo-Christian scriptures par excellence. So I knew something very significant had happened. I just didn't know what it was or what it meant, what I was meant to do with it. And like you, I then kind of had a period of a couple of years, I would say, when I didn't really sleep properly. I was in this bizarre half world between not sleeping properly and not being fully awake, but completely burning with energy and simultaneously completely exhausted. I'm very similar to you, Francis. I would say, looking back on it, that my nervous system just wasn't ready for what moved through it. It just wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I wasn't healthy. It was just extraordinary and life-altering, and nothing felt the same again. And I think one reason you and I are talking is because we hooked onto this theme of, the relationship between people who have chronic fatigue and Kundalini, because we're aware, aren't we? And I think we've said this to each other, that sometimes we see posts online of people describing their symptoms. And it does occur to us that actually, in fact, perhaps what this person is going through is some Kundalini energy moving through their system. But the question is, what to do with that. You can't just land that on someone.
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, I have occasionally as well been working with a client and suggested there may be a kind of energetic awakening kind of element of their journey. And but yes, but only when there's sort of a sense of that they would be open to receiving that potential, that thought. But yeah, I think spreading awareness of that sometimes, well, I believe both ways, that sometimes it can be the kind of, in a way, what's behind it all for somebody ultimately. Or it could be that because someone is struggling so much with their health because of other things, because of all the trauma, or, all the lifestyle things that have led to that, or, the behavior patterns, all the things that can lead to things like chronic fatigue, long COVID, those kind of things, that someone then goes on such a path to try to attempt to heal their body, that then it starts to awaken as a result of that journey of healing. I mean, I think it could be both ways potentially. Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely have people reach out to me sometimes and sort of share their story. They've maybe found my YouTube video where I talk about my Kundalini awakening, or I write about it in my book as well. And sometimes I do have people reach out to me, just email me and sort of feel validated and that sort of thing. So it's definitely the case that for some people that it's an important part, and perhaps having some context and understanding around that would be very supportive.
I think that thing of understanding what's kind of happening and having a framing for it can be really, really helpful.
Yeah.
It can help normalize it as well, because this is not it sounds extraordinary, but it's not an abnormal human experience. This energy exists in every human system, and Kundalini is always there as an energy serving the system. It's just a case of how that emerges into a lived experience. And what I find really fascinating is the view, again, I think it was Maharishi Kapriti who said that Kundalini is there to help resolve trauma, that it's an energy that responds to trauma. And if you think about some of the manifestations of it, it's actually quite similar externally to what sometimes happens with trauma release, when people have,
Yes, in terms of all the body movements that can happen with Kundalini and shaking and all those kind of things that can spontaneously also happen when someone's having a trauma release. So yeah. And I've had loads of that. And you might have noticed this, but even as we're talking, I'm still getting some body movements. It's not stopped for me that I still, 50, I know some people say after a few years that stops, but for me, I still get body movements, and if I'm doing any kind of practice, if I'm doing breath work or meditation, or I will get body movement still, or even just talking about these kind of themes. And so and definitely for me, I feel like it has been pushing through certain traumas, not only personal traumas but ancestral traumas, I think past life traumas. It's been kind of pushing through things step by step, and helping to clear my system of those things. And but in that process, but sometimes quite chaotic. I've had some healers go, in the past, certainly, wow, there's a lot happening in your system. And I'm like, yeah, there's a lot happening, I know. Yeah,
it's really interesting, isn't it? So what fascinates me about dealing with Kundalini is how central the practices are to healing generally. So really sensible things like grounding.
Absolutely. Yes.
Making sure you're getting enough sleep if you can, if the process allows. Having a sensible diet. Lots of self-care. Self-attunement. I love how it all comes down to some fundamental modes of self-love and self-care and grounding. And I think it's lovely to normalize both the experience of Kundalini processes, because actually normalization is important. I mean, it's something that's really been missing in the West, but is very commonly understood in the East. But as you said, rightly, some people in Kundalini processes get sectioned because their professionals around them have no way of understanding actually what they're going through. And so it becomes pathologized.
Absolutely. And I think, and to be honest, even back when it got the most extreme, I think potentially I could have been sectioned if it wasn't for the fact that my partner at the time printed off a load of stuff off the internet about Kundalini syndrome, Kundalini awakenings. And then it was just like, loads of aha moments about what had been going on for years, actually. So yeah, and I know my parents were both really worried and thought, there was something sort of, mentally wrong with me and I might need to, be sectioned or something. There was definitely a lot of fear around me and my family. Of course, their fear then also exacerbated my own concern. And there is mental health issues in my family as well, so which of course I think now, I believe is also a lot to do with trauma and all those things. Being unresolved, but yeah, and certainly, I got very involved in the Spiritual Crisis Network in the UK and kind of different sort of spiritual emergence groups and that kind of thing, and people sort of in that fine line between a spiritual awakening and what could be labeled psychosis or some kind of mental health problem. So yeah,
and it's something that takes some discernment and perception, and there are a lot of people who just don't even recognize the difficulties of spiritual processes, which after all are very deep, and true spiritual processes are not about dancing around with crystals, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's really this profound inner work, this profound release of repressed shadow trauma material through the system until we arrive at a place of really quite blissful equanimity and a predominantly grounded, calm, wonderful, beautiful way of being in the world.
Yes.
We all know healed people when we meet them, right? Because they exude that kind of beautiful, calm, peaceful, loving energy, and we can sort of feel it. Our system recognizes it.
Yeah.
But in the West, it's very interesting. It's how these things are pathologized. I mean, I, as I said to you, Francis, I didn't have a clue what was happening to me. And I don't think I had a clue what was happening to me for about 20 years.
That's a long time to be experiencing it.
It was a long time.
Without knowing.
It was a long time. And at the time when it was happening, I was having these very terrifying experiences that could come with like physiological manifestations. So the clearest one, and it really freaked me out, was I was really ecstatic playing a board game. And then suddenly the ecstasy turned to terror. And in the moment that it turned to terror, a cold sore just popped straight out onto my lip. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is really quite something. And I was concerned enough that I asked around for experienced mystics and came across a Russian Orthodox priest who just said, for crying out loud, stop meditating, get your hands in the ground.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that out because I've heard you say that on a podcast before. Yeah.
Yeah. Stop meditating. Get your hands in the ground, be around normal people. And for I suppose for about 2 or 3 years I didn't meditate at all. I then came back to it later, but I'd learned not to identify with the states, and I'd come into a very different relationship with my own process at that point. It was 20 years later, somebody gave me Stanislav Grof's edited collection, Spiritual Emergence or Spiritual Emergency, I forget which it's called. And in there, almost every chapter, there was something that I just went, oh,
yes,
that's that. And that was very liberating. It was really liberating. And it brings back this point of normalization, discovering that actually you're not the only person in the world that's having these.
No, that really helped me as well. That really helped me. And likewise, I had to stop meditating as well. I felt fine whenever I was meditating, but the more I meditated, the more my life got difficult. I think there was definitely some spiritual bypassing going on. I'd kind of meditate and be like, it was almost like the Kundalini was rising and I was just like allowing myself to get a high with it and not be grounded. And I felt amazing, blissful, incredible. And then I'd try and like live my life and try and get, I'd had 5 years of chronic illness and I was trying to, get my life together, start working and earning money and figuring out how to get off benefits, all that kind of stuff. And I just found the more I meditate, the more I struggled with my daily life and, practical things. And I also struggled to connect to any friends that weren't also on a spiritual path. I'd find myself saying things that they would just be like, what are you talking about? And I always find it a bit boring. Like, well, isn't this the only thing we can talk about in life? It's this amazing spiritual experience we can all have. And yeah, so I had to actually stop meditating. I had to sort of learn to be able to be normal and have normal conversations about everyday things, and that's okay too. And sort of come back to my humanity. I also had an experience where I sort of felt like I was so in love with everything that how could I have a boyfriend anymore? I'm going to leave my boyfriend because it doesn't make sense to just love this one human anymore. But then that left me in some other kind of craziness. It's just like
Yeah, I think there's a key here, isn't there? And I think the key here is those kind of practices can take us out of the body in ways that are really unhelpful. And my own growing conviction as a spiritual practitioner, I had my first mystical experience when I was 6, and I'm now 64. I've been on this road more than a day, let's say. And I'm increasingly convinced that true spirituality takes us into the body, that actually waking down
yes,
and experiencing awakening as a material, cellular, bodily awakening, actually really in the body, the transformation taking place at a bodily level, so that the practice is
yes,
going in to the depths of the grounded,
yes,
beautiful, peaceful, loving energy that is at the root of who we are, underneath the egoic and kind of
yes,
life history stuff. Underneath the little Anna person, there's something far more blissful, oceanic, profound, but absolutely embodied.
yes,
And I totally hear where you're coming from with that, because I went through phases like that as well in my spiritual development, where
yes,
my practice was taking me into spaces of really altered, expansive
yeah,
consciousness, which effectively meant that I was sort of observing the world rather than in the world. And now I can be in the world and simultaneously aware of an awareness of it. I mean, there's a different relationship, but it's not a detached, dissociated relationship. Whereas at times it became quite dissociative, in a way that I don't think is healthy. I don't think it's what we're meant to do spiritually. I don't think we're meant to dissociate. I think we're actually meant to be present.
yeah,
And that is a very corporeal matter, quite apart from every other matter that it is in terms of consciousness, awareness, awakening, energies, and all the rest of it. It's really important to be fully in the body. And this is where I think people with chronic fatigue might be on a quite unique path, actually. And one of the people on my program said, it's almost its own spiritual path. I thought that was such an interesting observation, and I'd love your thoughts on it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a massive spiritual journey, which as I've said, I believe began even before I started the clear kind of chronic fatigue part of it. Um, but yeah, I see that with so many clients and people and women that I work with in groups as well. That yeah, it's like a spiritual path in a way, and to get better, to get one's full health back, it often takes a lot of, I mean, some people seem to have these kind of magical, recoveries where suddenly they just rest a bit and they're better. But most people, it's a deep, soulful journey that takes many layers and levels of work. So levels of self-awareness, of patterns that are unsustainable. Like, for instance, I was a massive people pleaser and peacemaker, and had to be peace, at all costs, even to my health. And, to recognize some of those patterns, also big achiever, but also party girl, all the things, just too many things that led to my system crashing. And I see that in my clients as well. They have to often address so many different pieces. And then obviously beneath those kind of patterns of behavior, many of my clients have been massive achievers or helpers and that kind of thing. And it's been out of balance. They have to go deep into the roots of those patterns often to really heal them. Otherwise, sometimes people get better and then they get ill again because the patterns come back. And it requires all this work often to really transform and to sustain that transformation, to not then go back to think you can just then go back to being exactly the same person you were before getting ill. It's like there's so many lessons that you need to take with you as well. Because I do notice some clients, they just want to get back to being like full-time achievers and that sort of thing. I'm like, well, no, take some of the lessons with you. yes, achieve stuff in the world, and are you able to be still and okay with yourself when you're doing nothing as well, and having that balance in life.
For me, that's where the distinction comes in between healing and recovery. I'm very much about healing.
Yeah.
And not least because the clients I work with are often older people who've had it for longer.
Yes.
They've been ill for longer. And so they've often done all the brain retraining, autonomic nervous system training. They know about diet. They're researching health optimization. They're very motivated, intelligent older people. But they're, some of them are never going to get back to whatever their notional idea of their former self was. For some of us, including myself, I don't even know what that would look like, because I got MECFS when I was 30. I'm now 64. So what does it look like to be a healthy 64-year-old? I just know that I want to be as vibrant and full of life as I possibly can be at any stage of my life, and to dedicate myself to practices of living well. But it's a really interesting difference between wanting to recover, as you say, without changing any of the fundamental unconscious drivers of what's going on, and also without challenging the broader kind of metastructures in which we are, more and more people are getting chronically fatigued. There's a fundamental mismatch between how humans are evolved to flourish and how contemporary society actually treats bodies, minds, emotions, and spirits. And so there's the really, really important part there of the critical self-awareness of, what have I internalized? If I've just internalized a capitalistic achievement drive and I get well enough to carry on doing that, nothing fundamental has changed. There's a real invitation, I think, in conditions like MECFS to wake up at every level of the being, and to wake up also in relation to where we are in the 21st century, and the kind of continuities between the lessons we're having to learn bodily and the lessons we're having to learn in relation to ecosystems, the lessons we're having to learn in relation to planetary well-being. There's a really powerful, I use the word prophetic, impulse at work here.
Yes.
And I think those of us, Frances, who are on this healing path from MECFS and also know that for us that's part of a spiritual journey as well, people who on that path, people who are healing from this, are doing profound work for the collective consciousness.
Yes.
I mean, I see people with this illness not just as warriors in the sense that they're dealing with symptoms and doing well, which is often the way that we think about it, but as warriors in the sense that they're carrying forward a really radical message of a much more profound potential for a kind of living against the grain that at the end of the day, we all need. Yeah. We really need to change the whole way we live as a species. Yes. And people with things like chronic fatigue syndrome are learning that lesson very personally.
Yes.
At a very personal level.
Yes. Absolutely. No, yeah. I used for a while until I wanted to write a book about it being a wake-up call for humanity, that these kind of illnesses, that, yeah, absolutely. And the benefits of people really listening to that messages of things like, it's okay to rest, self-care is important, and all these things that are less, I mean, I think that's why personally, I believe that's why so many people got long COVID or chronic fatigue after COVID. It's because there was an already imbalance there, and it was a trigger. That's my personal perspective. And a lot of people didn't convalesce properly. And even I was, as a health coach, I kind of was a bit, I'm going to be fine with COVID. But the first time I got it, I was pretty sick, and it took me a few weeks to get fully better. And I had to really give my body that time to convalesce. And I felt that, oh my gosh, even after all this work, I could still be susceptible. But I did give my body that time to rest, and I didn't pace myself. And,
but that ties in, doesn't it, with this whole idea of coming home to the body as being such an important part of this deeper healing journey, including the spiritual journey, right? The body's so important in this. And, what you're saying when you're talking about giving yourself time to rest and everything, it's really coming home to the body as a form of intelligence that knows how to recover its homeostasis if we get out of the way. If we stop interfering and pushing it and pressing it and trying to manipulate and control it from quotes above with the mind and all that. When we really, really understand the body, when we really attune to the body as a highly intelligent system and start to cooperate with it, that's when really profound well-being, really profound grounding, really profound sense of really coming home to ourselves as embodied creatures really lands in our lives in a way that is truly beautiful and liberating. And so it keeps bringing us back to the same kind of central insight here, which I think applies to Kundalini process as well, about just the central importance of grounding, coming home to the self.
Yes. And the wisdom, there's so much wisdom in our bodies as well, actually. So much wisdom.
And I noticed how you put your hands on your arms then when you said that, which was beautiful. It was almost like you were embracing the wisdom of the body as you said it. It was lovely. Yeah. I'm just wondering if there was a couple of key pieces of practical advice that you'd give to anyone with a Kundalini disturbance or fatigue. Might be someone who's having a convergence between them, or it might be, as you said, that the fatigue is caused by the Kundalini, or it might be that the fatigue is the doorway into the Kundalini. What advice would you want to give someone?
I would say find people around you who understand and get what you're going through and can validate your experience. What we talked about in terms of connecting to the body, grounding. If there's a Kundalini aspect and it feels hard to manage, perhaps stop doing meditation for a while, focus on grounding, things like time in nature. I think nature can be a massive healer. And trust that it will all be okay. Yeah, that the energy within you has your best interest in it ultimately.
I love that word, trust. I mean, it's such a powerful word, it's such a powerful practice, and it comes down again to, it ties in with what we were saying about our own chronic fatigue journeys. If we cooperate with these processes, whether they're energetic forms of awakening, whether they're forms of rebalancing that's taking place in the system that feels uncomfortable for a while because something's been pressed into view or into experience that we'd repressed, or that, as you say, was ancestrally inherited. Trusting the process is such a profound practice of healing, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And a few times I've heard the chronic illness healing journey, or chronic fatigue, being a process of moving from an inner state of fear to an inner state of trust, keeping moving to that trust, and the power of trust.
Yeah, beautiful. And I guess that's one of your central practices.
Yeah. Trust has been a really important part of my recovery journey from chronic fatigue, my healing from, kind of coming into more balance after the Kundalini awakening, being quite disturbing for a period and all of that. So trust has been key.
Trust. So everybody, thank you for listening. Frances, thank you so much for a fantastically interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I think the audience will get quite a lot out of, especially those who are thinking, what the hell's going on in my body? I don't understand these energies. This might be a moment when they realize actually there's more going on under the hood than perhaps they'd spotted.
Thank you. It's been great to talk to you about these things. Thank you.